We grow when we give.
We grow when we give.
We grow when we give.
Nosotros crecemos cuando damos.
We grow when we give.
与えるとき成長する。
We grow when we give.
Welcome to R.O.G, Return on Generosity, a podcast celebrating generosity at work. Not financial giving, giving valuable time, alternative perspectives, and genuine collaboration. Our special guest today is Brian Formato, the founder of Groove Management, an executive coaching, strategic planning, and human capital consulting firm, and the creator of LeaderSurf, an adventurous development program for business leaders of all backgrounds, industries, corners of the world who want to break old habits and create lasting change. Brian has over 25 years of experience developing leaders and organizational capabilities. He launched Groove Management in 2014 to help the first-time CEOs step into new and uncharted waters. What I appreciate most about you, Brian, is your servant leadership heart and your willingness to create experiences that help people grow. Welcome to R.O.G, Brian.
Hey, thanks for having me, Shannon.
It's so great to finally get connected and share this time together. Why don't we start with a little bit of your background?
Yeah, so you hear surfing, and then when I tell you where I'm from, it's kind of a shocker. So I grew up in Manhattan, in New York City, in the 1970s. I always say that Halloween was a vertical event. Basically, it was done in an elevator rather than down the street. And my favorite possession as a kid was a skateboard. And so maybe that kind of parlayed into my love of surfing. I have a younger brother who's 4 years younger than me. We grew up sort of competitive with each other. And one of the great things that we had the fortunates of was we had a house out in the Hamptons. And so as a kid growing up in New York City, I had the ability to escape. And so I spent my summers out in the Hamptons on Long Island. And that's where I learned to surf as a kid. And that became kind of my passion. I guess people always say the grass is always greener. For me, because the ocean's always bluer. And so I'd always beg my parents, can we move out there, and can I just go to public school and ride my bike down the street to a friend's house? Because I always kind of envisioned what TV had taught us about what childhood was supposed to look like, and mine was very different. Chasing buses around New York City and riding my skateboard and sneaking into Central Park, which I wasn't allowed to do as a kid.
Oh.
But it gave me street smarts. It made me more worldly as a child, and so I think that served me well as I've gotten older.
Absolutely. That's so interesting. And you had the best of both worlds, right? That's one of the greatest things about New York. There's so much variety and the mountains. But now you live in North Carolina, right?
Yeah.
And you've been several places between New York and where you reside now, including your multiple roles in corporate America. I'd be interested in hearing just the highlight reel of what were you doing there?
Yeah, so I went to college at this small school called Eckerd College in St. Pete, Florida. Studied business management, and it was a satellite campus for the Center for Creative Leadership. And so I got really involved and loved kind of this concept of building leaders. And graduated, wanted to get a job in management consulting. The word was you need an MBA to do that, and to get an MBA you need experience. So I let my parents kind of choose my career path to begin with, and I got a job working for Bear Stearns on Wall Street. And it was the absolute worst job ever. It was all about who could step on to get ahead. And I had spent my college years learning about collaboration, teamwork, and leadership, not about kind of this dog eat dog world. And so after just under a year there, I left and took an HR job as an HR assistant at Golden Books, a children's book publisher. And fell in love with kind of the field and the fact that HR was a way to build culture and bring out the best in people. And then from there, just trailed my wife to the DC area. I went to American and got my master's in organization development. Worked for the Motley Fool. Worked for the AARP, which was kind of a fun experience as a youngster. And then eventually made my way to Time Warner Cable. And that's how I ended up in Charlotte, North Carolina. They wanted to move all their shared service environment to one city, and Charlotte was it. And we came kicking and screaming because it was so landlocked. And 21 years later, we're still here. So it's a good place.
That's a good place to be.
Yeah.
And then at some point in that journey, Brian, you thought, okay, there's something more for me. I have these skills. I want to absolutely talk about finding your groove because you are
Yes.
the person to help us figure that out. But so when you were finding your groove, like what problem were you trying to solve?
Yeah, it's a good one. So I had a number of really bad bosses.
Hmm.
And what I was realizing was kind of pattern matching. How did they become in leadership or management roles? And it was the best doer gets promoted into a position and they have no formal training or skills in that. And I kind of looked at that and said, I went through all this training and this schooling on how to enable that and unlock that and to recognize that the best leaders are selfless and that it's about serving others rather than serving yourself. And when I was in grad school, I had to do a pro bono consulting project. And I came up with the name Groove Management based on this concept that we learned called um, appreciative inquiry. And the idea in appreciative inquiry is rather than focusing on what's wrong, focus on what's right. And so I looked at that and said, well, if we focus on what's right, when a basketball player is in the zone or in the groove, they can't miss because things are just going their way. So playing to your strengths, and this is kind of before the whole Clifton Strength Finder thing took off, was around finding your groove. And so the name for this pro bono consulting firm that I launched in 2001 was Groove Management. I built a website. I used it for this project that landed me a job at the Motley Fool. And then for the next 13 years, it was kind of on the back burner as a one day I'll get to this as a full time job.
Amazing. And then what caused that one day to come to
Yeah,
pass?
so my last corporate gig was at Ingersoll Rand, running corporate communications for a division. I'd never thought of communications as kind of fitting with my background, but I had been with one of the CEOs of my previous company, Doosan, this Korean company that bought Bobcat from Ingersoll Rand. We were walking in Prague for some kind of, we were doing a road show. And he said, all this work you do that you call post merger integration work, it's really communications. I'm going to make you the head of communications. And I'd never really thought about the fact that a lot of the culture work really stems from internal and external brand and communications. And so the last 3 years of my career in corporate America was running corporate comms. And I got to a point where I was just frustrated with kind of the slow pace of change in a big company. My wife and I looked at each other one day and said, why are we both working for the man? We don't need both of us to do that. And I said, I'm out. I'm going to start this group management thing full time. And so ended the year and, kind of just said, that's it. I'm going to move on and start this company. And, it took me a little bit of time to get the traction and find not only my groove, but the company's groove was the more
Mm.
challenging piece.
For sure, and that's ever evolving, right?
Yeah,
I mean, that
exactly.
just feels like that
Yeah.
never ceases to find a permanent spot.
Yeah, true.
If you're growing, right? If you continue to grow, you're always changing. But at
Got it.
some point, you decided, hey, I want to shake things up in terms of how people learn, and
Yeah.
I love in your body of work how you remind us that the leadership development really hasn't evolved in the past several decades,
Yeah.
and you thought, well, let's change that, right? Let's use
Yeah.
appreciative inquiry. Let's use these tools that you've been accumulating over the years. So, tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that has, I mean, it's from my own experience. I was never a great classroom learner. I always say that adult learners are even harder than teaching kids because kids, while they may have a short attention span, what are they missing? They're missing their Instagram feed or their TikTok or whatever. But adults, yeah, you put them in a classroom, they start thinking, did I pay the mortgage? Did I pick up the dry cleaning? Did I do? And it's like
Yeah,
they're even more distracted. And so
yeah.
you have to keep their attention. The way to do that is through movement and action. And so been a big fan of action learning and the idea of getting people up out of their seats and specifically out of a classroom with fluorescent lights. And so taking people outdoors, doing retreat type things and giving them a shared experience,
Hmm.
whether it's doing icebreaker activities where there's puzzles to solve and you're not only focusing on how much time do they spend on planning versus execution, whether there was a timekeeper, whether there's a project manager. The most interesting is at the end when they succeed, do they say what's next, or do they take time to high five? And like, if you don't celebrate your successes, then you're going to fall into this rut. I have kind of gotten onto this whole track of, if you watch like NFL or college football, but more NFL because they allow the celebrations now in the end zone, the players actually now practice their end zone dances during the week. And it's like, we got to
Yeah.
score so we have
Yeah.
an opportunity
So we
to
can
go
do this
and do
thing.
this whole thing. Or, I mean, I saw the Monday Night Football game. It was in the snow in Buffalo, and the players were doing snow angels when they celebrated. It was super cool. But so the idea is, what does your team do to celebrate success? And
Yeah.
it's those little things that you build momentum off of. So
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of been my thought process around trying to inject some fun into the learning environment. And then
Mm-hmm.
that has gone even further as I kind of introduced this idea of leader surf. I can kind of share where that all came from.
Yeah. Yeah. Please do. I love that. And then I want to come back to the high five.
Yeah. So I was asked by a client that I had done a emerging leader program for if I could also do something for their executive team. They said, we all have our MBAs, we've got a lot of experience, but we're not good at giving and receiving feedback. We're not good at kind of leading others. We could use kind of a refresher. And said, could you build us a program? And I said, I don't think that's going to work that well. It's going to be, I use the example of, it's kind of like taking you to a karaoke bar at 10 in the morning, saying that the bar is closed, but each of you have to get up and sing. It's just
Mm-hmm.
going to be really
Yeah. It's just like
socially awkward.
awkward. Yeah.
I think you're better off sending each person to a program where they're interacting with people they don't know from other companies, and that the networking will be a strong part of the overall program. And the feedback was, that's great. So where do we send people? I said, well, let me work with you to figure out who should go to what. So we kind of said, well, the marketing person should go to a program that's more marketing centric, the finance person, a finance centric one. And that meant either going to a CCL like program or to a university based, kind of week long thing that's either like a Columbia Business School or
Stanford.
Wharton or you name it. And so they said, fine, let's work together and do this. Sent people to these programs. I interviewed them when they came back and asked them what was the best part of the program. They said it wasn't the program. It was the people I met and the time we spent outside the program, over a happy hour, at the bar, or at dinner, telling war stories and talking about our experiences at work and helping each other. I was like, so this peer mentoring piece was really the key to the program. So I said, well, what if I could build a program that wasn't under fluorescent lights, wasn't taught by a professor that wrote a book but hasn't worked in the corporate world in a long time, if ever. And so I started thinking about this. I worked with a friend that does instructional design. We said, well, where would you want to go? We both said, we want to go to the beach. And so said, well, why not do it at a resort where people can be in shorts and t-shirts for the week? What if the classroom is an outdoor classroom rather than inside? It's under a tiki hut. And we just kept iterating. What if there was one-on-one coaching? What if each person brought a business challenge that they were facing to the program? And then we said, well, and this idea of teaching people to be a servant leader, how do we do that? Well, we should do something that gives back to the community while we're wherever we are. We decided to launch the program in Central America. We did Nicaragua first, and we started with a day of giving that was about sweat equity, about giving back. And so we installed water filters in villages, and then we built swing sets at rec centers. And so it was about really teamwork and about leaving something behind that was going to help. And the last piece was, I wanted something physical that we could teach people or have them do. And we looked at yoga and other things. And I said, well, I love surfing. And one of the things about surfing is that even the best surfers in the world wipe out every time they get in the water. And business people tend to stay in their comfort zone. And the better you are and the more success you have in the business world, the less vulnerable you're willing to be. And so if we could put people in the water and teach them to surf, we'd actually have to force them to suck at something again. And looked at it and said it would be 2 hours a day. And what's great is the first surfing lesson, the first thing that they teach people is how to fail, how to fall without getting hurt, how to cover your head, or how to fall like a starfish. It's like, in business, you don't teach people to fail because failure is not an option, but our best learnings come from failure. So, that was the premise of the program. Took a kind of pilot program Took my wife, who's a business executive, and at the time my daughter, who was I think in middle school, and they'd never surfed, and made them both do surfing lessons, and it built confidence for both of them, and they had a great experience from it. And so then I did a pilot with some corporate execs, and from there, I was off to the races with this program, which was an open enrollment leadership development week-long retreat, or adventure, as I call it.
It's amazing. What kind of feedback do you get?
I get like crazy good feedback from the participants. The scary part is for the corporate people, right? So when I first tried to sell it, I tried to sell it to participants. They got really jazzed up about, oh, I want to go do this. And then they'd have to sell their boss, and then their boss would have to sell HR, and
Mhm.
then the funnel would fall apart. And so what I realized is I have to target either CEOs, heads of learning and development, or heads
Yeah.
of HR. And the hard part is, is this a boondoggle? Does this, am I sending somebody on a
Mhm.
beach vacation for a week? What do the optics look
Mhm.
like if we're offshoring jobs and, letting people off, and all of a sudden we're sending, people to Costa Rica for a week to go surfing? The truth
Mhm.
is the surfing is 2 hours a day. For 4 days, it's 8 hours out of the full week that
Yeah.
you're together. And I put this program against any other in terms of the true outcome.
Mhm.
What I've
Yeah.
found from the participants is you have people that come to the program, and um, they've got imposter syndrome. And
Mhm.
through traveling to Central America alone, being with a group of people they didn't know, getting to know them, getting to do some self discovery, learning to surf. Everybody gets up on the board in the program. They go home like, I'm a badass, I can do this, and
Mhm.
they found their groove. And then at the same time, I've had the people that show up as kind of, I'm the pompous executive that's here, and I know it all and I can do everything. In between getting beaten up by the waves, and then digging ditches for or for poles for a swing set, and then giving things to these little kids that don't have shoes on their feet. um it touches their heart, and they go home humbled. And
Yeah.
so the program gives each person what they need, and
What they need.
it's I
Ah,
love it.
brilliant. I love
Yeah,
it so much, and I'm
yeah,
so grateful that you do this work and that you found an awesome way to channel your strengths and your passions and what you
yeah,
believe in, and to put that into a way that serves others, right? It's
yeah,
it's
yeah,
generosity at its core. And I think all of us are designed with unique capabilities and talents. So your methodology is like, what is
yeah,
your uniqueness? What is your groove? And how can we help you
yeah,
find that?
yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah, I mean,
beautiful.
this whole concept of generosity, to me, the thing that and it fits with the ocean, is I think generosity does create a ripple effect, right? When
Mhm.
you're generous, then it starts a ripple that turns into a wave on the other side of the ocean that somebody else then can ride. And so it's about kind of modeling the behaviors that you want in
Mhm.
return, and you want to see in others.
Yes. What other parallels do you see between leadership and
Yeah.
surfing, generosity and surfing? I like the way
Yeah,
you
I
think.
mean, the ocean is an ever evolving kind of playing field that you can't control, right? So I always use the analogy that you don't catch the wave catches you. You've got to put
Mhm.
yourself in position to be successful. And what does success look like? No two waves are the same, and so there's so many kind of cool parallels
Mhm.
to it. And you know, I always say that the times that I actually do my best kind of creative thinking are when I'm running, when I'm in the shower, or when I'm in the ocean. And they're the three places that I'm the most disconnected from technology.
Right.
Right. And
Right.
so there's something good to be said about just sitting out there, one with nature, on a
Mhm.
surfboard, staring out at the horizon, waiting for what's coming next. And
Yeah.
surfing takes a lot of patience, because you could go out for, an hour or two and maybe catch one wave, and that wave
Mhm.
lasts under 30 seconds.
Yeah.
But
Right.
it's still an amazing, experience. And so it's been, a passion of mine since I was a little kid. And it's one that, I've taught my wife and my daughter to surf. I've taught many, other friends, and that one day it'll be grandkids. And, I plan to surf until I can no longer make it down to the beach. So
Why not? Why
Yeah,
not, right? And then
yeah,
I've heard you say that the mantra is paddle, paddle, paddle. Can you tell
yeah.
us about that?
Yeah, so there was a surf instructor for the program that we worked with. This Belgian woman, and her whole thing was this mantra of paddle, paddle, paddle. When you think you've paddled enough, one more paddle. And it's this idea just in life and anything you do. It's like, sometimes people, they give up or they quit just a little bit too soon. And it's
Mm,
this idea of like, you know just work a little bit harder, a little bit longer, and
mhm.
you'll see your way through. And the majority of, if you just watch people trying to catch waves, the majority of people, if they paddled one more stroke, they would have caught it, but they gave up a little too soon. And so
Mhm.
it makes for this great mantra just in terms of, you know, paddle, paddle, paddle. I think,
Yeah.
you mentioned this other woman that I work with, Natalia Cohen, who rowed across the Pacific. Their whole thing was, how do you cross an ocean? Stroke by stroke, one stroke at a time. And it's the same kind of concept.
Yeah, absolutely. I know. I can't wait to have her on ROG.
Yeah.
And I think it's also a good parallel to what you were saying about how much time it takes to get that wave versus the glory of riding the wave. So as a
Yeah.
leader, like knowing that there's a lot of hard work and kind of, like you
100%.
said, patience is
Yeah.
required for
Yeah.
this.
I think this is something that, I've continued to kind of, struggle with, but am learning. And I wrote a post about it, which I call the patiently intense leader. And it seems like an oxymoron, patience and intensity. But it's, you've got to let the game or the wave or whatever it is come to you. So you have to have patience, but patience sometimes means staying the course. But it doesn't mean
Mhm.
stopping or standing still. You got to keep moving. And that's what will enable good things to come your way. And
Mhm.
so I struggled with being impatient, when I was younger. I think as I've gotten older, I've kind of mellowed and I've become a little bit more patient. But at the same time, I'm kind of an intense person because I've got this kind of execution mindset. And
Yeah.
what I always struggled with was the idea that it's about the destination and not the journey. And I've been able to flip that quite a bit.
Mhm.
And back to the surfing, I think it's not about catching waves. It's about, whether it's walking down the beach with the board, stretching beforehand, putting the leash on your, ankle and paddling out. You have to embrace and love all aspects of it.
Yep.
Maybe not the wipeouts, but
But if you learn how to fall gracefully, you're all
yeah,
right.
exactly.
So to go back to the high five, you teach the high fives to your
Oh yeah.
students, and I think it's applicable to every
Yeah.
business.
Yeah, so when I launched the leadership program and we kind of do orientation the first day and we go through intros, one of the things that I frame the program around is the idea of, a high five, and it starts with your five fingers. So your pinky finger is the most fragile one, so it's about, both being safe, both emotionally and physically during the week, right? This finger, the ring finger, is about commitment. So being committed to each other, to the program, showing up on time, doing right by you, taking care of yourself. Middle finger, we never lift alone. So it's about respect, not disrespect. Um, right. And then this finger is the one that you don't want to point blame and so forth as you're going through. The thumbs up is about positivity, and all five of them make the high five. And so that's what we look for in each participant throughout the week. And so that's kind of the idea of creating a set of team norms, and a
Mhm.
culture for the week. And I'm all about the intentionality of the culture that you represent as the culture that you create.
Oh my gosh, that's
Yeah.
amazing, and everyone can think about that. And, what are your norms? How are you
Right.
creating a culture where people know what the rules are and can
Yeah.
contribute to,
Yeah.
the culture? And it's simple. It's simple enough, but
Yeah.
it's really profound. All five of those things are essential. So to talk more about generosity, I know you do have such a servant leadership mindset
Yeah.
and heart, and I love that. Curious to get some of your thoughts around why does that matter? You know,
Yeah.
how is it that you think that way? And then let's talk about some
Yeah.
examples.
Well, something I think it starts with, as a kid, we always, with Christmas coming up, we always look forward to, like, Santa coming, getting your stockings, getting your gifts and so forth, and pouring through them. And as you get older, it's like you realize that it's better to give than receive. right? And that the gift giving and watching the joy and the excitement of doing something for somebody else. And so I think that's that servant mindset and leadership mindset. And so
Yeah.
in my work, I do a lot of work around feedback. And in when I do 360s, one of the areas that people tend to do the worst is on both giving and receiving feedback. And it's because of a conflict aversion in many instances. And so if you're not getting enough feedback, you have to ask for it. And if you don't like to give it because you're afraid of the way that it's going to be received. And so I try to frame feedback as a gift
Hmm.
with people. And I use this analogy of a feedback piggy bank. Every relationship you have has one of those little piggy banks. And anytime you give somebody positive or constructive feedback, you're making a deposit. And anytime you give them constructive or developmental or negative feedback, you're making a withdrawal. And you got to keep track of the balance. The deposits are worth more than the withdrawals, but in the end, if you make more withdrawals than deposits, over time you could bankrupt the relationship. And once it's bankrupt, there's almost no turning back. And so it's
Hmm.
this concept of like, you've got to keep things in checks and balance. Um, and so it's not just what you say, but it's how you say it. And I think the generosity piece is around, where does it come from? Is this being done from a place of love, caring, respect, where you want to see the person succeed, or are you doing
Hmm.
it punitively?
Yeah.
I think parenting is kind of the best, model for this, where you have to remember that you have to give your kids some tough love, and that means saying no. And the way I frame it is that the expectation with this is that you're teaching them, certain rights and wrongs, such that when they then, I've got a college senior, get off into the real world and they're faced with this situation, and there's a little voice in their head: would dad approve of what I'm about to do? Right. And that's
Hmm.
kind of where the tough love hopefully steers their moral compass. And you can do
Hmm.
something similar just with your employees in terms of, how you provide them with, feedback. One of
Yeah.
my favorite kind of quotes that I ask each of my coaching clients is the question: would you thrive working for you? And if
Hmm.
the answer is no, I wouldn't thrive working for me, then why would anyone else? So you've got to
Yeah.
really kind of look at, well, how do you thrive? Well, people thrive when they're cared for, they feel that they've been heard, that they're respected, but also that the person is, sometimes giving them some tough love or some medicine to help make them better.
Hmm. Right. And like you said, it's all about where you're coming from.
Yeah.
What is the intention? And are you trying to make a deposit? Are you trying to accrue equity with that relationship
Yeah.
by making yourself uncomfortable for the benefit of
Yeah.
someone else? I think that's really important. And what a good self reflection question to say, would you want to work for yourself? Right. Because some of us just need that
Well,
mirror.
I'll take it. Yeah, and I take it even further, because it's not just work for, it's thrive. And to me, the
Would you?
word thrive
Okay.
means do your best work, like
Do your,
really
okay.
be in a position where you flourish, right? And you
Right. And if the
continue to
answer is
grow.
no, then what would you change?
Right. Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
And it's
get
a look in the
specific.
mirror. Yeah.
Mhm. Because when you talk about finding your groove, you're really saying it starts with self-awareness. So you need feedback from other people. You need to
100%.
humble yourself
Yep.
and all of that. What are some other ways would you suggest for our listeners to find their groove?
Yeah. So I think you have to lean into this idea of um, perfection scares people. Right. And
Mhm.
so finding your groove is as much about being willing to be vulnerable. Yeah, I think there's been a shift, and I think it's a positive shift, that
Mhm.
leadership now isn't about this stoicism and, tough person. It's more about being empathetic, showing some vulnerability, having authenticity in the way you approach things, and being intentional in your behaviors. And so those are the things that I think are super important when it comes to, what you're trying to achieve for a company. I always look at it through the lens of the fact that you can reverse engineer just about any product or service, but a culture is one of the hardest things to reverse engineer. And
Mhm.
so if you can build, a winning culture within an organization, um, yeah, those are the companies that do amazing things. And so that boils down to, if you create a culture that lives its values every day, and one of those values is this idea about generosity, I think that that's super important. think the number one asset that we all have that plays directly into generosity, and it's interesting that your podcast is right, the return on generosity, ROG. I wrote a piece called the ROT, which is return on time. And the
Same thing.
idea of time is the most precious resource, but it's the one that we all have the same amount of. And
Yep.
so how we use our time, not for ourselves, but to serve others, right? And you can write checks and donate money all day long to different causes, and that's
hmm
great. But when you donate your time to somebody
hmm
or to something, I think it sends an even stronger message.
Me too. Yeah, I heard it once said, how do you spell time? Love?
Yeah,
Right? It's
yeah,
the same thing. And it's
yeah,
how are you investing that? And I think a lot of what you talk about is, what do you have to invest in, then how are you investing it? Being thoughtful and strategic about it. And how am I bringing in some of those
right.
characteristics like you talk about, vulnerability, authenticity. And so for people that are hearing this and say, gosh, that sounds really interesting. How do I do that? Do you have, I mean, you talked about appreciative inquiry too. That
Yeah.
might be an interesting
Yeah,
piece
I
to
think
teach our
the
listeners
idea of
about.
learning a little bit more about that concept of appreciative inquiry.
hmm
There's a number of things on our groovemanagement.com website and the blogs around questions that you can ask
hmm
around how you are approaching leading other people. And a lot of it is about being a good leader is not about telling, but it's about listening and questioning and
hmm
asking good questions. As an executive coach, I spend more time listening and questioning than anything else.
Yeah.
And if I find myself going into advisor mode, I kind of have to slap myself and I'll apologize to the coachee and say, that's not my job, isn't to give you advice. My job is to actually facilitate you to answer your own questions.
Yeah.
I'm just supposed to kind of ask the right ones and kind of steer you in a direction. But if I give you the answer, then it's my answer as to what you should do, not yours. And you may not be as bought in.
hmm And a lot of your work, Brian, comes from your lived experience, from the great bosses you've had, from the not so great bosses.
Yeah.
Do you have an example of a time in your career where a manager either did or did not demonstrate generosity and what that meant to
Yeah.
you?
I mean, the one that always comes back to me is I was working for Time Warner Cable. I was kind of the director of people development, and I was traveling, a lot, like because we had 31 divisions all over the country, and I loved being at back to. I don't do well in a classroom or behind a desk. I like being out in the field. Um, my daughter had just been born. My wife and I, who are very career competitive, was on maternity leave, and she was home with our newborn, our daughter Olivia, and I was back out on the road traveling, after a few weeks. And I came home from a business trip, and my wife hands me this handwritten letter, and she said, "I got this in the mail from your boss." And it was a letter from my boss, Steve, and it said, "Dear Brita, I just want to say congratulations again on the birth of your daughter, Olivia. I wanted to thank you for allowing Brian to get back out on the road so soon. I know this must be tough on you, but I want you to know that he's doing amazing work for our team and for the company.
Oh,
Cheers, Steve." And I was like, to this day, she's like, he was the best boss you ever had. And it's like, Steve was pretty good, but it was the fact that he was thoughtful enough to track down the home address, write the handwritten note, and it just reminds me all the time that it's the little things that you do as a boss that make the biggest impression on people. It's not about giving a raise or giving, other things. It's about
mhm.
those intrinsic small gestures that really go a long way. And so to me, that was, generosity as a people leader at its best.
At its best. Oh, I
Yeah.
love that story so much. There's layers of
Yeah.
thoughtfulness in there. And the fact that all these years later, you're still remembering that
100%. So,
gesture.
and to that point, I do a question in a workshop, usually with executive teams. I did this just a couple of weeks ago with the team and said, what is the single one best piece of feedback that you ever received at work? Right. And you go around the room and each person shares something. And what's fascinating is that 90% of the time, that piece of feedback that people received was 10 years or longer ago.
Mm, not a lot of deposits in the piggy bank.
Yeah, but what's interesting about that is that it shows that when you are younger in your or earlier in your career, those are
Yeah.
when, the most
Oh,
impressionable things happen to you.
mhm.
And, people are more willing to tell you the things you need to hear when you are still an up and comer versus once you've reached a certain, level in the
True.
organization or
Yeah.
potentially a certain age.
Mm-hmm. Right. And then just how
So
important that is. And like you said, it's the little things. It doesn't
yeah,
need to be this massive win. It's how the person showed up or the
right.
contribution they made or the question they asked or the way they listened sometimes is the thing that people appreciate the most, how they collaborated. And I think, it just keeps my mind keeps going back to like the things you were teaching us about surfing and like falling off and
Yeah.
wiping out and how you just get back up. And, when you have a
Mhm.
leader who identifies that as not a failure, but a way to strengthen
Right.
you or us, that really stands out. And those formidable years are so precious. So
Yeah.
all us listening and thinking about the young leaders in our lives and how can we invest in them,
Mhm.
and help them to recognize how they thrive and what they could do to be even better. Yeah, that's
Absolutely.
huge.
Yeah.
So I want to do some rapid fire questions if you're up
All right.
for it.
Sure.
Okay. All right.
Yep.
Now let's see. Um, we thought of a couple of good ones for you. One is, what is one of your favorite songs?
Ooh. Huh. That's a good one. Um,
Like a
I'm
song that when
still
you're like driving and you can
Yeah,
roll the windows down
I
and
mean,
just sing.
I've always been a Jimmy Buffett fan, right? And so changes in latitude, changes in attitude, like just forever. It's like, it's about where you are in the mindset and something about bringing me back to the beach.
Yeah, that's such a good one. It's like a moods changer,
Yeah,
like you
exactly.
kind
I
of
think
can't
there's
hear
just
that
something
song
about
and be in a bad
yeah,
mood.
yeah.
What's the best or worst advice you've ever been given?
Um, I think the advice piece maybe around like, follow your passion and you can't go wrong. And it where that kind of came from was a good friend of mine and former coworker, a guy named Lee Burbage, who's the head of HR at the Motley Fool. You know, said to me, if you look at your past, Brian, whether it was your choice to join the sailing team in college, where you then met your wife, to the fact that every one of your vacations is around, going to the beach or going surfing, to where you chose to go to undergrad, to where you choose to live now on a lake, to all these things, like the water is like, always calling you. The idea that you created this leadership program, it was meant to be because it fits with you following your passion and finding a way to find the intersection between your passion and your profession.
It's so smart, and I love that you got that feedback.
Yeah.
Really true. What do you do for fun?
Um, Well, I spend time with my family as much as I can, although my daughter's in California, so that makes things harder. She was home for Thanksgiving and we'll be together for Christmas. But otherwise, I live on a lake. I have this thing that is called an e-foil, which is a flying surfboard. And it's my midlife crisis. And so basically from kind of March until I just put it away, probably until March, through November. You'll find me out flying on this thing on the lake, and so it's my inland surfing kind of passion.
Those look really hard. Is that
They're
sorry?
really not 20 minutes or so, and anybody can get up and do it. And once you
Yeah,
do it, then it's like it's the closest thing to this feeling of flying. It's super cool.
amazing. I think you're being generous there that anyone can do it,
Come
but I
visit. We'll
love
get
the
you out there.
encouragement. So yes, challenge accepted. What do you associate with surfing?
Um, so a few different things. One is connection to nature, which I think is super important.
Hmm.
Health and fitness is the other, and then the third is travel. And um, I've gotten to see and experience and meet some amazing people all over the world just because of my love for surfing, because there's a kindred spirit to it. And
Mm.
so whether, I'm, at a beach in Portugal or I'm, at a beach, in Long Island or in California, you're going to meet people that have that shared passion for it. And you get to see and
So
experience really
true.
cool places.
So true. Oh my gosh. And when you're in Costa Rica, are you so pura vida,
I try
right?
to
That
be. Yeah, I mean, there is something about we went on our honeymoon to Costa Rica 28 years ago, and it
oh
was all
wow.
dirt roads, and it was so kind of underdeveloped, and it was amazing, and absolutely loved it. And then we went in 2016 to Nicaragua, and it was like it was what Costa Rica used to be like. Now Costa Rica
Mm,
is very Americanized and overdeveloped,
yeah.
but you can still find uninhabited stretches of beach, and to me that's the greatest. I just love being on a beach where you actually can't see man-made structures. The place that we
Oh,
do the leadership program in Nosara, there's 100 yards of natural zone, and the idea is that from the water you shouldn't be able to look back at land and
mm,
see any man-made structures. And I
that's
think it's
special.
super cool in that regard that they
Yeah.
made that a pristine part of kind of the community.
That's hard to find.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I don't think I've ever had that experience, so it's probably beautiful. What is one thing that you most easily delight in?
Um, I think seeing, people that I love and care about succeed.
Hmm.
Yeah, it brings such joy when they do well at things. And so that's definitely high on my list.
That's amazing. All right, two more. One is what never fails to make you laugh.
Um, hmm, I'd say either The Office or Ted Lasso.
Great shows. Oh, and Ted
Yeah.
Lasso needs to come out with the next
I
season,
know
please.
we watched it again over Thanksgiving because
Oh,
my
what a good
daughter had
idea.
never watched it, and it was like the writers are fantastic. And The Office
Genius.
as well. It's just like the
Yeah,
stupidity of what office culture. I imagine if The Office did a new episode with work from home, how funny that could be.
that would be really funny. They should think about that. Put that out there in the universe.
I know.
And what do you think is a key to living a good life?
Um, let's go with generosity. I mean, I think
Yeah,
if you can invest in relationships and invest in making others better, that will reflect back on you. And so, I'm all about the mark that I leave on this world, knowing that I'm not here forever. And that mark is more about the people that I have impact on. And
mm,
so the clients that I've worked with, that I see them move on to do bigger and better things, the companies I've worked with that have had huge success, the ones that have struggled that then turn it around. To me, those are all those proof points that it's like, okay, what I do matters, and that's important.
that is really important, and it does matter. And it
Yeah,
really is the ripple effect that you spoke about at the
yeah,
beginning.
yeah.
And just thank you for investing your time with us and giving us these nuggets of wisdom and encouragement, including the surfing and encouragement. And just thank you for being that light that so many have benefited from, that radiance. And I just wish you a very healthy, happy, and safe holiday season.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate this, and you asked great questions. So this was really fun. So thanks again, Shannon.
Oh, my pleasure.
Thanks for listening to R.O.G. Return on Generosity podcast. Please help us grow by subscribing and reviewing us on your favorite podcast player. And for more information, visit bridgebetween.com. We grow when we give.
우리는 나누면서 성숙합니다.
We grow when we give.
On rayonne quand on donne.
We grow when we give.